Since the start of the Frankfurter Buchmesse, we've been talking about the relations between the Philippines and Germany, mostly through the lens of our national hero, Dr. Jose Rizal, as well as I think there were a couple of talks about explorers and artifact hunters who also visited the Philippines from Germany. But here we're going to explore another very overlooked linkage between the Philippines and Germany, and that's through cinema. So this is the Philippine-German Connections in Cinema panel. We're joined by Nick Deocampo. So he's a multi-awarded Filipino filmmaker and historian, as well as Ingo Petzke, internationally renowned film historian who translated Deocampo's book into German. We'll trace back landmark Philippine-German film connections, which have enriched the art and practice of filmmaking in both countries. So let's give a hand to our speakers. Okay, I'll introduce you first, and then you can start with your talk. So, Ingo Petzke is an internationally acknowledged German film scholar, filmmaker, and author. Since 1974, he lectured in 34 countries, among them New Zealand, Hong Kong, Chile, Argentina, USA, and Canada. In 1986, the Philippine government awarded him for the international contribution to Philippine independent cinema. So Petzke is Professor Emeritus of Film at the Design Faculty of the University of Applied Sciences, Würzburg in Germany. Since 1992, he lived and worked several turns in Australia, almost 7 years in all. He was also adjunct professor at the School of Creative Arts at James Cook University in Townsville, Australia. His main areas of interest are the history of international avant-garde and more recently, Australian feature film. So again, another hand of applause for Professor Petzke. Go ahead, please.
Yes. Yeah, I'm just not loud enough. Okay. Yeah, thank you for being here. And I hope we'll have an interesting talk because Nick and I, we met 41 years ago. We were already alive then, yes. We're still alive and we hope to go on a little bit. And I don't think at that time we thought that we would meet again here sometime in the future. We've had more or less, and I'll talk a little bit about, and we'll talk about this, why this happened, all the meeting, and the big role that the Goethe Institute played in all this. Yeah, we have had on and off contact during the decades, sometimes more, sometimes less. And the last time was before Corona, actually, when I was a guest professor at the Film Institute where Nick was teaching, University of the Philippines in Quezon City. Yeah, and he already had published a lot of books by that time. And the Philippines have something that I, just like that, would like to call an annual Nobel Prize, a domestic Nobel Prize for the arts and design. And Nick won, I think, by now 7 times? Five times, okay. The National Book Award, 5 times the author of the year for his book on the Philippines. He is really a workaholic. My wife always says I work too much or I worked too much, but I'm just in the shadow of Nick. That is completely a different role. Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about film. Let's start very, very easy on. What was the first film you saw? And what was the situation when you saw the first film in the Philippines? Because I can say I was very young, and my first film I ever saw was Bambi. And I grew up in a village, and the print was very lousy. It had lots of stripes. And when this famous scene in Bambi comes, where the forest is burning and everything, and everyone was crying in the auditorium, and I'm being a country boy, I said, no, this is impossible. It's raining. There won't be any fire. It's impossible. So that is my first recollection of film. That's American film, obviously. That's a feature film. Had nothing to do with what I became interested in later. That was not quite the same with you.
No, not quite, because growing up in one of the islands, Panay Island, so I grew up in Iloilo, although I was born in Manila. The first film I saw was a film that was required for elementary students. You go and watch a science film, an educational film. And when the lights came out, of course, the little kids would scream. And then the first image that I saw was a seed that was growing up through animation, of course, but little did I know what animation was. And it turned into a sap, and it turned into a bush, and it turned into a tree. So that was very magical. And I thought, to a certain point, I was connected with cinema. But then later on, you get to be required to watch Snow White, and then later on you move on to bigger films. Until, of course, I encountered Federico Fellini's Satyricon, and that, when I saw it at a teenage year, that's when I really decided I wanted to be in cinema. The magic of cinema was something that always drew me to go back to the theater.
By that time, was it easy to enter the film industry in the Philippines, or what was the situation like? Or was it just a dream?
No, because I had this burning desire to make films, so I thought that I needed to go to Manila because I thought there was a film school. And mind you, that was around 77, 78. The political situation was becoming intense because Marcos, of course, declared martial law. So there were a lot of protests that were happening in the University of the Philippines where I was enrolled, where I was about to study. So my mother didn't want me to go there because she said, it's dangerous to be in Manila. But no, I was rebellious enough. I said, I passed. Very few people could pass the university exam. So I passed. I went there only for me to find out they teach broadcast communication. There was no film school. It was so I went to theater. Then 6 months after I graduated, I got a scholarship to study in France, in Paris. And little did I realize that upon my return, I would be instrumental in creating the film education that we will talk about shortly.
Yeah, that's quite interesting because, as I mentioned before, 41 years ago, the Goethe Institute sent me to Manila to show a package of experimental films, particularly the avant-garde film of the 20s. And Nick was no professor by then.
No.
He was just the second in command. And he was among the people. I came back for a second time because they wanted me again. And by that time, Nick and a lot of people had broken ranks with the university and moved to a completely different place, which we'll talk about a little bit later then.
Yes. So to your question, was it easy to get into the movie industry? No, it is never easy to get into that industry, especially if you believe something else. My training in Paris, I think, really transformed me a lot. And just to continue the story, right after I graduated from Paris, I took the train, went immediately to Berlin. It was my first international film festival. And there in Berlin, I think my entire life changed. The film that won for that year was Werner Fassbinder's Veronica Voss, if I'm not mistaken. And just meeting this legend of a German director, was just fascinating for me. And there I was maybe such a hustler. I was able to get a German producer, a journalist, living at number 32 Neukantstrasse. I know very well where he was. But he funded my Super 8 films, which I guess shortly I will talk about. And maybe I can use this occasion to move on. Can we get ready with this? So I have prepared 9 slides. I'll be as quick as I can. But it's very visual so that you'll see exactly selected episodes of the German interaction. Can we go to the first slide? We always go back to Rizal when we talk about the Philippine-German relations. 100 years ago, it was the novel. All right? The novel was the medium upon which the political consciousness, the desire for independence and freedom was really expressed. We all know that, and we look back to that. And there were intellectuals who got hold of the medium of the novel in order to express dissent. And 100 years after, during my generation, another revolution happened. That was against a dictatorship, Ferdinand Marcos. And we were young students in the university. It's a radical university, the University of the Philippines. And we organized, mainly from theater, I was hired to be in a film school. And my job was really into education. And I don't know if Professor Ingo knows about it, but that was when I arrived from Paris. I already came back maybe 2 or 3 years, and I was just restless. I have seen forms of avant-garde and experimental cinema in the West that I knew exactly, had a lot of relevance in terms of the politicization of cinema in the Philippines. So I was in charge of workshops that would invite mainly German filmmakers and educators to come to the Philippines. Little did we expect that Professor Ingo Petzke, with that fantastic name, would arrive in the Philippines. We were looking for him. We were expecting some old white-haired guy. And then suddenly there he was, very young guy. And he immediately jammed with the students that we have. So anyway, let's move on. So all I'm trying to say here is that one must look at the context of Philippine-German relations within the spirit of radicalism and desire for independence. And we had to seek it in cinema against the backdrop of a raging political social change. Next slide. The professor was right in talking about the Goethe Institute. It is the cultural center, the cultural arm of the Germans. And we were neighbors. It's walking less than a kilometer from the office where I work. This is how it looked. It is now an abandoned building. It's very sad. It's a landmark place, but the rent, nobody was renting it anymore. And so anyway, everything is now in the business center in Makati. But that was where we saw the German classics, the Metropolis, the Blue Angel, name it, Fitzcarraldo, films that just changed our minds. Why? Because these were films that you could not see in the movie theaters. What were shown in the movie theaters were, of course, the Hollywood the Hollywood entertainment films, and it's almost like a monopoly of Hollywood and Hong Kong film, Chinese films being shown in the Philippines. So this was a different appetite, and we who came from the university, who had radical aspirations, saw this amazing film, further fueled later on when the Neue Deutsche Kino, the new German cinema, was shown, and this is where the likes of Professor Ingo Petzke would come in. Next slide, just to be quick about it. Then something very important happened in '83. The diva of German Neue Deutsche Kino, Werner Schreuter, arrived in Manila to show his films, invited by the Goethe Institute, but he wanted to make a film. He already made films in Argentina and I think Colombia, and he was banned in those countries. But there he was in the Philippines, and then I was assigned to be his assistant. An assistant to the Werner Schreuter was just going to a film school. At that time, I was also doing my film, which I will talk about in a little while, the one that was funded by the Berlin journalist. But anyway, working with him was interesting. So he was invited by Imelda Marcos, to go to the opening of the Film Palace, the controversial Film Palace and everything. He was there shooting, but he had a totally different intent. He wanted to expose exactly the problems with the dictatorship. And then later on, there was military threat against him. His film, Der Lachinde Stern, The Laughing Star, was almost banned in the Philippines. But when the Marcos dictatorship fell in 1986, the film, I think, was shown in a lot of TV stations. So this is, for me, a very important turning point because I have personal knowledge of this very close German-Philippine relations, and I was able to put the poetics of Werner's way of making documentaries into my film. Anyway, I'm halfway through. Next slide. All right. Very quickly, on a personal note, I told you about the Berlin director, journalist that who funded my film. He was always in the Philippines because he's got a German girlfriend, and so he would bring the Super 8 films that literally I stole from his arms because he thought I was making a pornographic film. Because at that time, my first film was about this female impersonator. I was working on poverty, prostitution, and social change. And so there was this transvestite who was performing all these shows. And his most controversial act is to insert 100 yards of thread inside his anus. And he performs a thread, a web all over, which reminds you of Kafka and Metamorphosis. But anyway, I gave a name because that was a military period. I gave my name as Rosa ng Maynila, which is a homage to Rosa von Braunheim, the radical gay filmmaker in the 70s in Berlin, whose film just blew me away. And I said, it's possible to be a queer, radical filmmaker. And that to him, I really owed a lot. Let us just move on to the next. Of course, this is just to show you the episode of the Revolution. And interestingly, if you can see that green book at the other side, the Goethe Institute with a local publisher published reflections made by those who were engaged in the 80s, 90s alternative movement in this wonderful book. Next slide. This is where I want to talk about Professor Ingo Petzke and the significant role that he played in terms of sparking a new cinema in the Philippines. We only had, for almost 100 years, maybe 80 years, commercial Hollywood cloned cinema. It's all escapism. But what emerged from the university, moving on outside to a more private space, we were able to now engage and discover new language in cinema. Our dream was similar to the Oberhausen Manifesto. The old cinema is dead, we believe in the new. We believed it strongly. I was the advocate for it. And what did we mean by it? If we need to destroy cinema, its entire infrastructure and poetics, so it will be. And I've got my book to talk about it, all right? It's very heavy, 880 pages, all right? But the interesting
it's a Bible.
it's a Bible. It is a Bible. But I'll get into that. But the people you see at the center are, this is the strong evidence of a German-Philippine relation. These are the key people in creating that, not only creating, but reaching a golden age for experimental alternative cinema in the Philippines. That's Professor Ingo Petzke. Another important one is Berlin-based filmmaker, Christoph Janetzko, who was into abstract nihilist filmmaking, and Dr. Uwe Schmelter, the director who made everything possible. But you see, that phenomenon of a new alternative cinema in the Philippines was possible because the East and West Germanys were not yet united. We were working from 83 to around 88, 89. By 89, the Berlin Wall fell, and there was no more money for the so-called Third World. All right, we have to get by with that. So the phenomenon institutionally stopped, but thankfully the universities and the individual filmmakers, I individually never stopped making films. It didn't die in us. We had to make more and more and more films. Anyway, lastly, I think I'm on the last. So I cannot go into all the details of the poetics and politics. It's an entire lecture that I can give, but all I'm trying to tell you is that the films that were produced have radically changed the poetics of what Philippine cinema is. So I contend that there is no one cinema anymore in the Philippines, but a plurality of cinema. And I think we were prophets for that time because now with 7,000 islands, the Philippines has awakened to exactly the principles that we set forth in 80s of an independent cinema, independent of the movie industry. So Manila is almost like marginalized in that sense because one cannot even count the number of independent films produced all over the archipelago of 7,000 islands with different languages. And mind you, it's not just the verbal language, but it is the filmic language. So let me move on to the next. And I think this is the last slide. So here we are now. Here we are now with a book on Philippine-German cinema. I do hope you all get to buy. This is published by Berlin-based printer, Schuren Verlag, and it is named Das Philippinische Kino Essays und Betrachtungen, all right? Essays and Reflections on Philippine Cinema. So, I'll leave it there. We had screenings with Kidlat Tahimik at the Deutsch Film Museum, and I hope this will happen as a follow-up for this big event that we have here. We hope to be back next year with a film and book tour, this time really addressing this very important relation that cinema did not only happen because of Hollywood for us. I think we have discovered by coming here that the German relation cannot anymore be made marginalized. I hope to write a book on that as well.
Let me go back for a moment and to tell everybody here, because you mentioned before the Goethe Institute. Originally, sorry, the Goethe Institute was invented to give advice and money to German language teachers abroad. And in '68, always a very important year, they changed tack and included as well money and advice and help in all other art forms. And they had the directors here. It was on the slide before you saw Uwe Schmelter, which was the director of the Goethe Institute during most of the time. They usually stayed used to stay just 5 years in a country. So they got involved, but not so much that they could be partial or, I don't want to talk about bribery or whatever, but too much involved in it. So then they had to change to go somewhere else. And originally, before Uwe Schmelter came to Manila, there was another one that Nick mentioned before, Dr. Bretzler. But these directors always had different focus. And I think Bretzler's main thing was he did the renovation of the bamboo organ in, where was it? I forgot.
Las Piñas.
Las Piñas, yes. And then Uwe Schmelter came, and he was completely in film. Under Bretzler, already workshops had started in Manila. But I think, it's my personal opinion, and when I read the first criticism of the book, I heard I was very opinionated in my introduction. So I'm very opinionated here again. These German filmmakers came into the Philippines, and I think they were more looking for cheap labor for their films than really giving an opportunity for the Filipinos. And this changed, obviously, tack with the workshops that came later, and that was mostly under Uwe Schmelter, where the participants made films themselves. And the good thing is, if you go to documentaries and even experimental films, they normally they had short films. So you can do them. It could be a film of just 2 minutes or whatever. It's possible, and it doesn't have to be 90 minutes like when you're doing a film for the cinemas. And what Schmelter did with the background of the headquarters of the Goethe Institute in Munich was really bringing in a lot of different people who could cover different aspects of what was not taught in the Philippines by that time. And all in all, there were 14 workshops with, I think, 97 participants altogether. And they did something like 40, a bit more than 40 films, if I'm not mistaken. The problem with the Goethe Institute is, when I tried to write this chapter while I was last time in Manila and had something to do at the university, the Goethe Institute doesn't have an archive. This is crazy. This is absolutely crazy. If you go to them and say, when did you brought over that famous director, the conductor or whoever, they can't tell you. And still, if you're being sent out by the Goethe Institute, you have to write a long report afterwards. Everything that you did and didn't do, and what went well and what didn't go well, but no archive. And I think that is really a catastrophe because they really incented so much around the world. It was not just the Philippines. The Philippines happened with film because there were the young Filipinos who were eager to learn and convert it into their own language. And I remember I didn't understand a lot of the films in my first 2 workshops that I conducted. I didn't conduct more. I didn't understand what it was all about because it was very symbolic and ceasefire countrysides and whatever, and I couldn't understand it. But now, afterwards, I can. And this was the pressing thing for the people. And Nick was the one who, at the Mole Fund, he moved over, he didn't say this, from the University of the Philippines to Mole Fund. That is short for Movie Workers Welfare Fund. I think that was a kind of luxury for them because it has nothing to do with welfare. But at least they had a nice building as well. And I think this is important because you need a focal point where people meet and talk. And in the book, Nick talks about the first times in the Goethe Institute when he watched some of the longer films, and they sat until the night outside on the stairs and talked and discussed with people long after the Goethe Institute had locked up for the day. So that was important, and that went on with Mole Fund as well. And they had some equipment there. And they had even equipment they didn't know about. An optical printer, for those of you who are a little more film-averse, and it didn't run anymore. And Krzysztof Janecko, the one he mentioned, he took on him to inquire and find the spare parts that needed in Germany, and he brought them for his next workshop to Manila and repaired the optical printer. And then the whole workshop, everybody wanted to work with the optical printer. So that's things that happened, and at Mole Fund Film Institute. And that is, I have to say, on a personal note, that was the only time I met someone who later became president of the Philippines. He was,
Tell us.
Estrada. It was Estrada. He I don't know what he was then. He was
He was a vice president.
vice president of Mole Fund. Yeah, okay. Not that I was too impressed, because the rumor was, he has 11 mistresses. It's a great macho. Okay. No, that was nothing to do with film.
Thank you, Professor Petzke and Professor Deocampo. I wasn't able to introduce Professor Nick a while ago. Just for everyone in the audience, Nick Deocampo is a filmmaker, film historian, and author. He recently retired as a film professor at the UP Film Institute in the University of the Philippines, Diliman. He has served as jury member in various international film festivals. As a scholar, he has been recipient of various academic grants and fellowships. Among his publications is Alternative Cinema, the Unchronicled History of Alternative Cinema in the Philippines, or as Professor Petzke called it, the Bible. Okay, he is presently the chair of the UNESCO Philippines Memory of the World Committee. In 2023, he received the Premio Casa Asia, Spain's highest cultural award. He is also the recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Film Development Council of the Philippines for his achievements in cinema, and the Gawad Chancellor para sa Natatanging Guro from the University of the Philippines for his academic and teaching excellence. So, I do have a few, sorry, you were about to say.
No.
Before we open the floor to questions from the audience, I do have some questions. Could you tell us about the making and the production of this book, especially the translation? I'm very interested to hear that stories about that as well.
Yeah. What should I say? Okay, we talked about this for a long time, that Nick wanted to have a book. He has so many books that he has written, and I lost track of them. And then this opportunity came up, and we had a long talk, and I thought, okay, because by that time he had already contacts to both a French publisher and a Spanish publisher. And all of a sudden there were too many offers to him. And then we decided in long talks, I said, okay, let's concentrate in this one more on the history of the Philippine movies. And like the French one was more about the theory, exactly. And the Spanish one, I think, yeah, which we haven't mentioned before, just very, very briefly. The Philippines have been 300 years under Spanish rule. And then they got rid of the Spanish rule. And the Americans came to help. That's what they said. And when they were there, they said, "Oh no, let us become the new colonial administrators." So then the Filipinos tried to fight against the Americans, but as we know, America can be very strong. It did lead to many dead people, but was not very successful. Then in the Second World War, the Japanese came and tried to incorporate Japan in the sphere of Asian welfare or whatever that was called.
Prosperity sphere.
Yeah. Okay. And then MacArthur returned, and I'm very opinionated, sorry. He completely destroyed the Americans' Manila, which by that time was still the jewel of the pearl of Asian, and they had a fight house by house warfare against the Japanese. They kicked out the Japanese, all right, but Manila didn't exist anymore. Okay, so you have the different influences in this. Okay, and then Nick decided, and I think that was a good idea, not to write it completely new, but take chapters and talks he had already given somewhere else and put them together. And I said, yeah, maybe I'll translate them, because what I hate is German non-fiction books that are too full, where the authors always show that they know all the philosophy and all the important whatever, and you can't read it. And I thought a film book should be readable as well for a general audience. Even a general audience should get something. And this is what I tried. And I even tried, with all this discussion with artificial intelligence, I have to tell you, some of the chapters I tried to do with artificial intelligence to make the work easier for me. It wasn't. Absolutely it wasn't. I found out artificial intelligence does not work in questionable cases. Sometimes it was Nick's fault that he had constructed the sentences, that artificial intelligence didn't understand it. Sometimes the whole concept wasn't right. And I always had to go back in those instances to the original chapter, and that was very, very time consuming. And I had to translate it anyway, and I said, give it up and try to make it understandable. Nick can't understand German, so he can't tell me if it was nicely. I hope it will be okay. But
Why you tell me?
so
Yeah, Professor Deocampo, how about for you? What was the process like of having this book translated into German?
It's always a dream for an author and for a historian that his works will be translated in other languages. I just did not expect that in one swoop I would have my books translated into German, into French, and into Spanish in one event. And I think what spurred it was this National Development Book Development Board, because they gave an incentive of some money in order to around $2,500 in order to translate and to publish the book. All right, I don't know how my publishers did it, but I think they had some money to do that. So I have written already, before these 4 books came out, I have already written 16 film books, mainly historical books. And so I went back to all my the 3 major publishers in Manila, UP Press, University of Ateneo Press, and then the Anvil Press, all my publishers, that I said, can I get excerpts in order to put into one book? So for this one, mainly they were all already written books or essays, but the one in French, which is theory, I was going now into French postmodern theory into Foucauldian, Kristeva, Barth, Deleuze. That was a pretty difficult one because I have to write new ones. And I knew if I had it in French, oh my God, I am going to be speaking in the language of these theorists of the cahiers du cinéma and all of this. So that was kind of scary. I won't go into that because we are in Germany, but I am very eager to launch my book in Paris. In fact, 5 sites in Paris, festivals and cinematheques when I get there. But here we are. It covers almost 100 years of cinema in the Philippines. Cinema was introduced during the Spanish period. So it is wrong to say that cinema was brought by Hollywood, by America. No. Cinema was the last jewel, was the last legacy that Spain delivered to its colony. That was it arrived late 1896. First screening was on January 1, 1897. Remember, 2 days earlier, Rizal was just shot. So this is the historical event that I work on. It's one of the most complex cinemas because the birth of cinema in the Philippines was swaddled with revolution and the Philippine-American War. So the historical event that surrounded the birth of cinema was really a state trauma for us, a trauma for the people. And what was the role that cinema would play in that moment of colonization? Then I would see that 90 or 100 years after, it would replay in my own generation. So as a film historian, you relish moments like this. But I have to do all my researches for this book, the original, at the Library of Congress, at the Cinémathèque Française, in Tokyo, and in whichever place I can go to. And for this, the one that I would like, I'm talking to the Shuren publishers here, Tony, I hope that, the next book that I'm going to publish would really be on the German-Philippine relations, which will be very, very interesting because exactly of some historical connections that I made.
Thank you, professors. I'd like to open the floor to questions. Yes, we.
So it's a question for both of you. On the topic of Philippine-German encounter in film. Encounters, and you've already given hints, right, how your first encounter with German film was so influential for you. And there's a lot of enthusiasm with which you talk about it. Encounters are chemical in nature. They are transformative. And the question is for both of you. How did the encounter with German film shape your sensibility? That's part A. And how did your encounter with Philippine film shape you, Ingo? And that's a part A. Part B also is when you refer to the trauma, as heir to the trauma. In what way also was that encounter healing of that trauma?
Maybe I should start. We grew up with the Hollywood movies and the Tagalog movies that were clones of the Hollywood. So we had so much as our staple menu, the ingredient, the chemical ingredient that you said, we had so been overwhelmed by that. So that seeing cinemas coming from other countries would come as, well, should I even say a shock? Cultural shock, but a shock nonetheless. Why is it a shock? Because my study of one book I have on 750 pages of the Hollywood influence on the Philippines. And mind you, as a student in New York University, I would spend a lot of my time researching at the Library of Congress. So I have everything documented from the time Thomas Alva Edison, the American inventor and inventor of cinema, made films about the Philippines as early as 1898. He was the first. And these were propaganda films he shot at West Orange County in New Jersey. All right, that was one encounter. But let us go to your question. So from out of that came a lineage, a long legacy of commercialism, escapism, name it, all right? We were the Hollywood of Asia. That's not a distinction. So here you go, our next door neighbor, just a kilometer away, which we can walk, we watch this crazy Nibelungen film, the films that just shocked us. It's different from the horror films of vampires and everything. I mean, here is something more visceral. Okay, but the more important thing is that we were allowed to talk back, which never happens inside a movie theater. There was open forum just like this one. There was an intellectual knowledge production that was interesting. You're talking about influence. People think that, oh, I watched a film and I was influenced. How is the big question that comes next. What was offered to us by that space? A space that is it is diplomatic grounds, you see. We can talk bullshit and we can talk against the military because Goethe Institute is a diplomatic ground. No military can get in unless they get a legal whatever. So there was a safe space, we now call it. Outside, talk about it. It was still the period of militarization. Your next door neighbor might be an informant. Hell, you just get paranoid. So influence. Here you are, 17, 19-year-old kid that I was, listening now exactly to the context of, fascism in Germany, that these horror films are products, according to Krakauer, products of reactions against fascism, the coming fascism in Germany. And how was that fear and paranoia encoded cinematically? The process was made open. If that is not influence, I don't know what is. So now you begin to think as a Filipino, because I'm not German anyway, whichever you want to, gulp me in with all I can never be German. Therefore, I had to think about it in my Filipino terms. That we have military dictatorship, how does it compare to fascism in Germany? There we go. Then Rizal is being invoked as somebody who can liberate through his novel. We have film. Can film liberate us too? So parallels were made. This, sir, is a very important question. And thank you, because I now have a chapter for my forthcoming book. Thank you. Thank you, because now you are making me revisit exactly what was it. And mind you, there are some people who attack us and say, oh my God, but that's German colonialism, Excuse me. And usually I'm not going to say from which country, but our fellow Asian country would say, that's another form of colonialism. You just don't know the process. The way of struggling, with an encounter. It's not as if we were stupid. Hey, we're honor students from the university. I'm not being boastful, but I think we know exactly our Frankfurt School. We know exactly. We have theories behind us, so we can, in some way, we were able to create our own context and the poetics, the strategies on how to use cinema for our own purposes against a dictatorship. I hope.
An amazing. Thank you for that amazing question. But I believe Professor also.
Very, very briefly. My specialty is really avant-garde film, experimental film. But I was more in the structure of this before. And when I came to the Philippines and I realized that these young filmmakers used experimental film for expressing politics and social agendas, it made me really rethink. And in the future after that, just to give you one example, when I did workshops in other countries as well, quite a lot. Thanks Goethe Institute, they sent me around a lot. The last one we were talked about, I had a workshop in Malaysia. And Malaysia is a Muslim country. And all of a sudden, all the girls from the groups made feminist films, short 2-minute films about being a female in Malaysia. They didn't name Malaysia. But I thought this was highly interesting, that you could use experimental language to have a topic anyway and have a content, which I was not too aware of before. So you have different possibilities. And in that sense, it has changed me as well. I did not follow too much of, you can't see Filipino films here in Germany. I think there was not even one one DVD. I had to import it from the UK. It was the Lino Brocca, the two films, Insiang and Manila in the yeah. So that was about the only thing. So you can't see it. I couldn't follow it in that sense. But yeah, it influenced me as well in my perception of what experimental film is.
Thank you. Would there be any other questions? Okay.
Question to Nick. You mentioned the director, German director Werner Schröter. In mid of the 80s, I saw one film of him in Kommunales Kino, Der Rosenkönig, but I thought it's very hard to watch it until the end because he uses photographic motives and put the camera on the spot a couple of minutes. So what is fascinating for you about this director?
You need to look at Werner Schreuter's career as multifaceted. That was his extreme end. That was where I went crazy over Werner Schreuter with his experimental, improvisational films. But he also had a narrative side. If you've seen the Berlin, his Berlin Golden Bear awardee Palermo is more on the narrative, very accessible, about this somebody from Sicily who comes to Berlin and has a hard time, right? But on the other hand, and little is discussed about Werner, is his documentary career. That was what I saw and what I experienced when he made a film in Manila. And documentary, as we know it, is not the conventional type that we would see normally in some American documentaries. What he did, the poetics of his documentary was different. I would accompany him. We go out into the street. He sees somebody quite interesting, maybe with a job to do or whatever, and then he just and he tells me because he speaks in English and I have to translate it to the Tagalog, and then before we know it, the camera is set up, and suddenly the one he's interviewing is already part of his film. It's amazing. There was one young man that that we saw who was just peddling some thing in the street, and then suddenly he has a talent for toothpick that he breaks. He puts water in it, and lo and behold, Werner Schreuter got a camera under a transparent glass. And then the toothpick, I think 3 of them, he puts water, this young man, and then suddenly it turns into a star. Which is, I think, the reason why it's called der Latschendesterren. One star is also Imelda Marcus, which is a sarcasm. But the star, throughout the film, the beautiful thing is the young man cannot really construct it perfectly every time. So the entire sequence has a motif of a star being constructed until finally in the last sequence, the star beautifully formed out of this toothpick. So, I mean, is it scripted? Did we know? I mean, we just met this young man in the street and suddenly we found out he's got a talent for making stars. Not only that, he gets archival footage from Library of Congress. He gets photographs of Rizal. He reenacts scenes from novels. He shoots in historical places. Amazing, which somehow found its way in terms of style into me. And that's avant-gardism that goes into what otherwise is an orthodox documentary.
Professor Petzke, would you also have thoughts about this director?
No, not really. I'm not too. I don't know him too much.
I'll add one more. Of course, as a queer filmmaker myself and a very young guy in my early 20s, I was always looking for somebody who should be able to, serve as an inspiration. So it's the Germans, who, Rosa von Braunheim, the radical filmmaker. I know you're laughing, sir. All right. Yeah. I mean, our generation, we know Rosa. And I think I would like to meet him again when I go to Berlin. Well, I will be doing my queer reading, and I will have a screening of my queer films. Because the first time I showed it in Berlin, who would appear in my presentation? Rosa von Braunheim. Oh my God, that was such an honor. And I met him again 2015 when I was a jury in the queer section of the Berlin Film Festival, the Queer Teddy. And he was there, and I had a photograph, the photograph that you saw. So I look forward to seeing Rosa again. But sadly, Schreuter is already gone.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. Would there be any other questions from the audience? Okay. Professor Deocampo, I do have one. When you first watched German cinema when you were 17, 18, 19 years old, you felt very inspired and radicalized. Today, do you think how is this spirit sustained in the alternative cinema of the Philippines?
What sustains you is the principle. I think that never dies down. The example and the new cinema that they proclaimed before has become very old, all right, very tired. But the principle remains. It is the principle that I can still teach to my students. It's still the same spirit that goes into the writing of my books because the principle stays. These are values, I think. So, but I have gone deeper than that. Now I know why when our students in the optical printing class would destroy cinema literally. This is what happens. They get films that are not part of the final film. You know that. Those that are being thrown into the dustbin, right? Christoph Janetsko asked them to get all those rubbish films, bring them to the workshop, and then subject them to, your favorite words, sir, chemical decomposition, either through vinegar, either through natural process or whatever. And then they're going to reshoot it while the colors disintegrate, the celluloid becomes distorted, warped, and everything. So in other words, we discover film as film. Because what you know of film is it is a story. It is a narrative. It is Hollywood. But no, now, we go now into the very ontology, the very origins, the foundation of what cinema is. This, as an educator myself, what interested me, what fascinated me. So the classes that I had served as a laboratory for the books and the theories I'm going to write. So, sir, you talk about sustainability. This is what I would like just to share, that in the end, encounters like this are very important. Influences will happen, but what I think we need to step back and see what are the principles that could be used, that we could react against. All right, and we have 5 minutes left, all right, for our chemical interaction. All right, so that's it. And we have the films to show. It is a special moment in the history of cinema. This is where the bifurcation, the split happens between the mainstream commercial and what now is independent, alternative, abstract form of cinema that has become contextualized into our Philippine experience.
And I think I would like to add a very short remark. What I found interesting as well, that even in the political films, or not even, but in the political films, social films as well, the Filipinos work with extremely many symbols or in a poetic language. I remember I saw one, for example, where there was a long shot, almost 10 minutes, and they have red flags planted underwater. It's an extremely poetic view. If Sari's Schwester did this one. And it's about completely different things. I mean, yeah, okay, guerrilla warfare and whatever it is in Mindanao in the south, but she had this scene in there where it's just red flags underwater, planted underwater. It looks wonderful, poetic. It's a whole forest, and why underwater? It doesn't matter. It's poetic. And this is what I think is very important in this type of experimental films as well. It's not straight documentaries very often, but poetic in the sense that symbols are used in it.
Thank you so much. Let's give one more round of applause for Professor Nick Deocampo and Professor Ingo Petzke.
Please buy copies of our books.